One. Boom. We're live. So, welcome back, everyone. Today we're starting a new week. We don't usually do these on a Monday, which is really exciting. Why I wanted to take them. I wanted to get this going. And Nikhita, me and you have been going back and forth some time to get a date in the diary. And I'm
Yeah,
really excited to do this one because of what Moxo's doing and how well you and the team seem to be doing. And I was speaking to your contacts. I really wanted to get you on to learn from you. But first of all, welcome on and brilliant to have you with us today, Nikhita.
thank you so much, Tom, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be good. And I'd like to know a bit more then. So when we get people on, we always ask them for people joining us, wherever they're coming in from across the world, people that watch the recording as well. I'd love to know, Nikita, a little bit about your background. What got you to where you are as being strategic business development in Moxo, and what your kind of story was with going into this world? Was it by chance, or was it something you've always had a passion for? And tell us a bit about yourself and your story, Nikita.
Sure, thank you. I think growing up in the Bay Area, there's a natural luxury that you have being surrounded by technology and the development of so many big tech brands and tech companies. My hometown, Los Gatos, is actually where Netflix is headquartered. So
Oh,
you can imagine the culture of being in the Silicon Valley is truly what they make it out to be. Everybody is somebody in tech and someone you can learn from.
yeah,
And so I think from a young age, tech is naturally in our language. It's naturally something you're, not only adapted to and comfortable with, but especially during the last 10 years, the amount of growth we've seen and the impact we've seen tech have on a variety of industries. It's not
yeah,
the tech industry, but tech is impacting every vertical out there.
yeah.
Has always been something that's intrigued me and fascinated me, how much of an impact and pull it has. So my background naturally, being in the Silicon Valley led itself into the tech world. And I've actually been at Moxo since pretty much the start of the company. Uh,
Nice.
I'd say traveled around with many different roles. And as you know, in a startup, when it's a very small group of people, a role really means anything you can do to help out, right? So whether that was business development and looking at our outbounding, campaigns and really understanding what does our client at Moxo want? What does our ideal client buy and why is it important to them? So that led me down actually to the path of where I am today. Today, I actually lead our customer success team in product marketing, and I
Yeah.
still do a lot of work in the strategic business development space. And that's kind of how I got here today.
That's kind of cool. I like that whole story about how it goes through, and cool to see from the Bay. Like you've had that experience in the Bay Area. So many hot startups there, and so many cool stories that come out of there. It's
Absolutely.
really cool. And at the moment, you've got a nice visit coming to the UK, right, to see how we work over here.
I mean, I think that's what's brilliant, right? Now, anywhere you go in the world, especially a hub like UK, there's so much technology development and
Yeah,
so many interesting companies out here and people you can meet. So we do a lot of conferences and a lot of business out here in general.
yeah. We were just talking about it before we got on about how I think I was mainly tuning your ear off a bit, Nikita, about how much I love conferences and how successful it can be. So it's very exciting to see it all happening, and especially with the travel as well, because we were saying that human touch, that human touch point, you can't beat it. Like you can't beat them being virtual, and I think it's such an important point, and I think a lot of people think that as well, which is cool.
100%.
And what do you think then? So, if we look at it a bit more closely, what you're doing at Moxo and what your role's been, Nikita, and what you were saying you've been doing and how you got into it, how are you seeing it? Maybe because you've been with Moxo from the start or close to the start, how have you seen the world of automation change? And how have you seen it help improve companies and help improve businesses and not just businesses, but entire industries like finance and legal, which you see massive amounts. I mean, I work with a company called Alpha Lake, and they do a lot of that towards the healthcare sector. What's your kind of take on it? Do you see it going up, down? What do you think?
I think it's only going up, but I think the thing we need to start with is defining what automation means.
Yeah,
So take industries like, the financial services industry or legal. These are naturally complex sales cycles or complex services that are being delivered to another human being. So automation means something different in this world than it might with somebody simply going and withdrawing money, right? And automating that process. You don't need a human being as a part of that. But the minute you get into complex services, you're buying a service, you're buying the knowledge.
yeah,
So if I'm going to a lawyer, I can't talk to a bot, right? I'm paying for that, your knowledge and your trust
yeah,
and the expertise that you have. So I think automation means something huge across these industries. It's vertical agnostic, but what it means to each of these complex service cycles is that it's about easing the load on the
yeah,
human being, making life easier for them. So I like to call it the Uberized world. If you take Uber as the model for everything, it's about making things move faster, right? This entire world we live in now is about opening your phone, clicking a button, streamlining a process.
Yeah.
And so digital automation, I think, is a more recent term. It's truly come up in the last 10, maybe 15 years. And this idea of digitizing has given automation itself a whole new meaning. So if you look at mobile, right, it's changed the way information is processed, the way services are delivered. So if you take industries like legal and financial services, they're facing a paradigm shift. These services used to be delivered in-person methods. And then you transition to some email and phone calls, and probably actually just phone calls and fax before that, but everything is in person. So now with this paradigm shift, you're looking at industries where the service journey of any client, that life cycle, involves a knowledge worker, complex services where you cannot remove the human being. And so I think, while it requires a lot of back and forth, there's actions on both ends, there's exception handling. We see that all the time at Moxo. These businesses come to us because they say, hey, automation doesn't mean we can remove the client and the human being interacting. We just need to find a way to streamline it and make it simple for us to manage, make it a more convenient, easy experience. And that's where I think Uber, oftentimes looked at as a brilliant cab company and transforming the way, people can call a car and a driver. What it is it's a brilliant tech company. And it's streamlined the entire car calling process where you previously had to pick up your phone and call. So what they've done is they've managed that workflow. They've created a new way to streamline and manage the cab calling workflow. So I think that if you look at financial services and you look at legal, healthcare, they're all industries that are now taking on this term of Uberizing and automating their world by thinking about how they can make things move faster, but without removing the human being.
I like that. That's some great points. It reminds me. So I was working in an agency, and they were like ahead of their. Well, I say ahead of their time. So this was only a few years ago. But when I was working there, I saw they were very quick. They're already hybrid working. They're already remote working. They already had teams across the world, and they did do meetups, but it was Slack was heavily used. Virtual calls were heavily used. And then I went into engineering. And I'd gone back on myself. It was all very go print this off, ring this, and then I remember everything. And it was just now I hear about that company, and it seems like things have transformed pretty quickly to making sure that they can handle things virtually and do calls virtually. And I was like, it's bizarre. Just take it for granted now. And
absolutely. I mean, it's so much of this we take for granted because one fine day we could click a button on our phone and food's delivered to our door, right? One fine day, all of a sudden, you don't need to think about picking up your groceries. I mean, I need some home supplies here. I can go to the John Lewis app, click a button, have it delivered by the end of the day, right? So everything is about making things easier. And I think that's what automation is. Automation is how do you remove the bulk of the, difficulty of manual handling in the process?
Yeah.
But people tend to take that definition and think that means remove the human being altogether. That's where you see that approach of AI 100%. And it doesn't work in certain industries and certain types of services, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I've never seen it actually. I don't know what the research is, and I can declare a stat here, but I've never seen it from personal experience where automation has taken someone out of the loop. It just makes them more effective, makes them quicker, makes them better, makes them more rewarded, and it just helps them get things along. I hear this word all the time, and I mean, you can watch countless episodes, Nikhita, where people mention it around robots taking job, and I just think it's bullshit. It's not something that's going to happen because we're naturally drawn to doing more. We're very greedy as people. We want to do more. We want to hit things. We want to get better targets. We want to do things. I don't ever see that becoming light. But I do think you made a great point, Nikhita, where we want things quicker, faster, better. Where do you think personalization comes into it? How do you feel about that coming into it? Because people want it quicker and faster, but they also want it, if it's not for me, I don't want to see it kind of attitude. How have you seen that change, or how are you seeing it shape up at the moment?
Well, I think it's an interesting point you make, because if you look back 1,000 years ago, business was one based on relationships and trust, right? A lot of sit downs and meetings and comfort building. And then they're signing on papyrus with a quill. So fast forward 1,000 years later, you're on a video call, you're meeting in person, you're maybe getting a coffee, right? If your COVID levels are comfortable, and now you're meeting again, supplemented by a lot of digital communication. And then, oh, by the way, you're using an e-sign provider to sign on the dotted line. But the bottom line is it is still a personal relationship that's built upon trust. Yes. So I think if we look at patterns of history tells us so much. Well, we have to identify where human touch is required and where it's not required, and where can some of that be automated.
Yeah.
So if you're relating that now to complex processes, they're typically highly interactive processes. There's a feedback loop. You're going through review, presentation, approval cycles. So it's all about striking a balance and blending the two into one cohesive experience. So rather than taking that approach of, let's say, 100% AI, which is where I go to, hundreds of conferences, and that's what you hear first. And while I think that has a huge play in the market and a lot of validity in many industries, many times it's the way at which you come at the problem statement, which is the issue in the first place. I would say at Moxo, we worked with so many businesses across, such a variety of industries, right? And you see that human touch is required in the process, and it's an integral part of that service cycle. And in fact, we saw a legal business that told us, hey, in the end of the day, when you're going and a client is searching for a lawyer, it's not always under the happiest terms. You're typically searching because you could be going through a difficulty in your life, or, some sort of litigation matters are not, the most happy, let's say, occasion to which you go and seek out legal advice and counsel. So people are looking for trust. They're looking for comfort. So her whole thing is, if I can give them that trust and comfort in that initial experience that they have with me, it's a feeling you give people. And if that feeling is, hey, if you're working with me, I'll get back to you quickly. It's such a streamlined, easy experience for you. You know what you need to do, and I'm right there with you in your pocket, accessible through your mobile. That hits differently, right? It's the same thing as, maybe 50 years ago, sitting somebody down and giving them a really nice cup of tea or coffee in person, as it is now giving them an amazing digital experience where you're right there with them. So I think it's all about reducing the manual load, and it's less of artificial intelligence in these industries, but assisted intelligence. So finding ways to streamline those interactions and functions and workflows, but aiding that knowledge worker, that team of workers who are there to coordinate the delivery of that service, make that service happen faster, and build trust. But so if you take that legal process again, a lawyer and a client, you're probably going through a case consultation, deciding you're going to sign on. Then there's document prep, there's court prep, there's evidence gathering, there's, discussions over strategies. I mean, just think about how detailed that process is. And in fact, I get this all the time. I'll get a link, right? I'll get somebody asking me to sign something. I see an issue in the contract. What am I doing? This is the problem that so many businesses deal with. I'm picking up the phone. I'm writing them an email. Hey, do you see this line over here? There's an issue. Sometimes I'm, recording a screen capture and shooting it over. And so that's really where I see that whatever your approach to technology and automation is today, it needs to be focused on removing the manual load, but thinking about where those pieces are, that there's such a difficult struggle. Those issues of the back and forth and the interaction. The problem is today, a lot of times the answer in these industries is, buy 50 pieces of technology and it'll solve your problem. And quite simply put, it typically adds more problems. You've got a CRM on the back end that none of your salespeople are using, right? You've got data being put in. You've got incomplete stories. The relationships are being managed actually in this device on a WhatsApp or, separate text threads. And then you've got emails. You've typically got some sort of a messaging channel, a meetings channel, a docu channel. And before you know it, it's a really complex process. So I think about finding those little areas that cause so much pain for people in the interactions and removing the chaos.
Yeah, I like that. That's really good. Because you're completely right. Like when I see things, and I had the experience myself, we were across all the platforms at once. We were on Zoom, we're on Teams, we're on Slack, we're on all these things. And I was getting tired. So I was like, where's this document? And they were like, is it on Teams? And you're spending all this time and it doesn't become streamlined. And this tech stack, and I know bigger companies might use things like ServiceNow, or they might be using automation tickets or CRM or whatever it might be, Salesforce, HubSpot. And then you're using maybe MailChimp for your mailing. It's just it can get so big where more is not better. More is more, like more work, more admin, more. I think that's such an important point, Nikhita.
And at the end of the day, apologies, go ahead. I just when you said that, it made me think, in the end of the day, even if, let's say, there's 10 steps in your process with a client, maybe 9 of them are happening internally. Doesn't involve the client interacting with you. But that one final step does, right?
Yeah.
You can interact where the client is. If the client wants to call you, you're going to be on call, right? And
Yeah.
so that's the problem. If you're purely looking at internal organizations, and by the way, I'll get into that a little because I think there's something interesting there too. But if you're purely looking at these internal organizations where it's a small business or medium business, and you're not looking at interactions where the client is involved in the process, it doesn't really matter what you use in the end of the day. There are naturally ways to automate and streamline, but it's your client, when they're the one driving the interaction and they're buying your service, that's where people need to look at, how can I streamline that process? Because that's where your money is. That's where your revenue is coming in from.
Exactly.
And then you can take that same definition and apply it to very large companies, because I would say there's a lot of organizations where we work with where it's not about external clients and internal, staff, but each department functions as its own organization, right?
Yeah.
We had a company come into us recently that was talking about how they're the graphics department in a bank, and it's a very large bank. And they're basically the department that manages the workflows of creating marketing campaigns and videos for every other department. So the corporate banking department, for wealth, for retail. So it's thinking about when you're the host organization and you've got all these other participants from different areas coming in, how do you manage that in one singular streamlined way, in one continuous workflow, where it's not, hey, here's all the automated steps and actions, but oh, by the way, you have got a question, escalate to another channel. It should all be in one single functional place.
I like that. And have you seen, maybe that's a good one I'd like to ask you, and hopefully this is worded rightly, but have you seen it since everyone been going digital? And I think digital transformation is a buzzword at times, but it also is a very much needed topic to be addressed, and how to do it, and what providers you use, and what tech stacks you use, and whatever it might be. But have you seen it where industries maybe have gone more right than others? Because a lot of them did a very quick shift. It was very, over the space of 2 years, it was, you talk to them now, it's, we're not siloed, we're across the board, we've got channels, we've got all this. How did you see that from your point of view, Nikhita, of just what some of the biggest lessons you've learned, either by yourself personally or as a whole company in Moxo, with the different industries you're across?
So I think that's a really, it's a multifaceted question, because I would start by saying, when I've looked at a lot of the businesses we've interacted with, the start of COVID, and I know this topic has been beaten to death by so many people out there, but I would really say the start of COVID, while many people would say it brought on a long-term technological shift and this comfort with tech, I do think at first the focus was very much on internal processes. So I'm going from being in person 100% of the time, and a lot of these organizations had never done it any other way, to, I can't meet you. You're in your home and I'm in my home. My immediate focus is not necessarily the client process. We'll get to that because that's naturally a part of it. But it's, how do I even manage the immediate people that are working for me, right? So I think that's the shift we first saw. We saw a lot of businesses running to just buying up video solutions or signing solutions, the basics to be able to see and manage their team. But once they started using that, then you get into the, what are they, Zoom phobia, or the, tiredness of sitting on video calls. And then it started to get into the middle of the pandemic, where people were more like, okay, well, now that I can at least know my team's functioning, I need a better way to manage all this, because it's extremely chaotic. And I think that's what I've naturally seen coming from the space of streamlining client interaction workflows for so many complex businesses. I can tell you the biggest learning is there's so much tech out there. It's all about what you're going to focus on, right? The critical thing any business should look for is, how can you find tech that focuses on the entirety of the client-facing process? Making that easier, right? And I keep saying this, but it's finding one solution. And many times people are still stuck with the, omni-channel approach, or the, let me have a point solution that combines everything, and I have all these channels. But overall, it still leads to a disjointed experience. And that's the biggest learning we've had. We came in thinking people are buying Moxo so much because it's making the client's life much more convenient. It's so much easier. But then you talk to all these businesses using Moxo, and they're like, yes, that's an added benefit. Of course, it's great for my clients, but it's so much better for me, who's managing this client-facing team. Because now there's almost, in all of these businesses, 3 parties, right? There's the person who owns the organization, or that team of people who are client-facing. There's people who are actually delivering the service, the knowledge workers. And
Yeah.
then there's the client role.
Yeah.
So those three roles are typically highly, highly chaotic. So how can, businesses look for a solution that essentially captures that back and forth and typically, manages those multi-step interactions in one single way?
Yeah.
So I'd say no matter how large or small the business is, it's the biggest learning I've had and I've seen organizations have to do is focus in on that one problem.
Yeah.
Because so many amazing technologies out there for different problems.
Yeah.
So if the problem statement is I need to just completely transform my business, that's too broad.
Yeah.
So digital transformation as a term, it is a buzzword, but it means something and it means 100 different ways you can analyze it or look at it. So you have to pick one problem
Yeah.
and focus on solving that one problem. Where I've seen it go wrong is when you're trying to solve 10 problems at once.
Yeah.
Then typically you see businesses sit on pilots for years, and 2 years later, they've still not done anything with it because they're trying to do too much at once.
Yeah. I like that. That's what a key thing we do in the business as well. Do one thing with all your focus, all your effort, and just if you're going to do that one thing, be good at it and be amazing at it. And I think that's a great point because I don't know. I saw some stats saying that there was 87% of digital transformation initiatives fail or something. And I was like, yeah, but how many of those digital transformation initiatives actually had a roadmap and actually had a what problem we're trying to solve here? It was more people thinking we've got budget to spend, we're panicking, and we need to show that we're doing something. Let's just throw loads of money at a big new tech stack. Then it's not our fault if it doesn't work, which is obviously not how it works. Like it's not how it's supposed to work, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you see it with bigger companies. In fact, I think that's a big problem for them because it's okay. When I look at a problem, I'm looking at, 18 systems I already have on the back end. I mean, take financial services. It happens all the time where, they've got a transaction banking system, their core banking system. They've got, a compliance system, a CRM. And then they're sitting there like, well, where do we start? How do we take all these systems? And that's where I'd always say it's helpful when you focus back in on what's that one problem statement you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
And with bigger companies, when you're able to say it's tying it to a process, that's the biggest thing we see with Moxo. It's not about a department or looking at even one segment of clients, but we see the most success with businesses who say, okay, I'm a wedding planning business, so I'm going to look at my production house working with clients through the budgeting process, and I'm going to use Moxo now to manage all the different parties and actions in that process.
Yeah.
And then once you get one process going, you can add on 50 processes or 100 processes.
Yeah.
And it makes it much easier to take a very large problem and segment it into workflows, right?
So what I'm hearing is, because I've seen some of the stats as well. I've seen like you've got experience with Moxo for 10 times faster onboarding, which sounds pretty cool. So having that personal experience, but also automating it. What I'm hearing there, Nikhita, and correct me if I'm wrong, is once you've got it nailed down with one process, it's very quick to scale. So you can put it through not the whole business, but you can put it through that whole process and scale it to not one customer, but 20 customers, providing that they meet the same criteria. Is that right?
Absolutely. Because I think, this, and you talked about learnings. What was a learning for us as a business was we didn't even realize, I think 100% how much people were using Moxo for literally a process and a workflow. We used to realize, hey, they're using it for their client journey. But what is the client journey? The client journey is it's a service cycle. It's a delivery of a service. And there's multiple workflows that make up that service cycle. It's typically broken into onboarding and then ongoing account servicing. And as part of account servicing and onboarding, I would say there's a mortgage company we spoke to, a lending firm. They said 90% of the lending process is made up of exception handling.
Yeah.
Exception handling is I've got a question. It's not expected. Most of the complex service cycle is exception handling because it's all the questions and interactions I need with you that you can't plan for. You can't templatize that part of your conversation. So I think the brilliance of the learnings we've had through COVID and through the last few years is, quite simply put, whether you're a large or small business, you've got a process you're running. It's made up of multiple workflows. And you need to look into where the gaps are in the workflow. Where are the points that are taking the most time. So as a product, we've realized that too. People use us to streamline a process. Okay, well, what does that mean? They're looking to decrease costs, increase revenue, decrease the amount of time spent on manual tasks and service more clients in less time. Okay, well, Well, that's what we've looked at as a product is now how can we develop and take these types of stats and make it so easy for a business to use Moxo and say, hey, in the 8 onboarding processes I've run this week, I've noticed this is where my team spends the most time. 20% of time is dedicated to this one step. Oh, well, that's a learning for me. Maybe there's something in that step I need to change. So this is the type of insight that businesses want. Where am I losing time? Where am I gaining time? Because loss of time means loss of revenue and increase in costs.
100%. I always think you've got the same amount of time. I always hate the word as well. I'm not taking off point, but someone says, "Oh, I didn't have the time." I'm like, I hate that excuse. I'm like, don't tell me that. I'm like, it just wasn't a priority. It's okay if it wasn't a priority, but you don't have more time than someone else. But do not use that quote on me. I'm like, I don't care who said it to me. I'm just like, please don't say that quote to me.
100%. You have the time. It's whether it's a priority to you or not.
Yeah, exactly. I always using that. So maybe walk us through it, Nikhita. So I'd like to know this on what you would recommend then. So say if I'm a startup or a big company, what technical or what do you look at when you're doing this in your role? And now you're obviously more in the client success side, but you said the business development side still obviously plays a role in that because you want to help with those customers and take them to the next level. What does it look like when you use technology solutions? And what would you suggest for businesses looking to leverage and automate if they're just starting, if they're thinking, okay, we've gone from, and I'm making this, you can think of your own as well, but I'm just making this up. I've gone from 20 people to 100 people in the space of 18 months. And we really need to start looking at how we need to automate some of our processes while keeping that core customer focus of personalization and having those touch points with them. What would you recommend rather than them panicking and eliminating things to actually help them on that journey?
So I think I've talked a bit about focusing in on the problem statement, right? And then breaking it down into processes. But I would first start by saying, look for a platform that you can get something off the shelf with or turnkey. I think many times most businesses out there, right? Most small, medium-sized businesses looking to automate, you don't have an in-house R&D team and 50 people on engineering to build something for you. And by the way, even when you do with the very large, let's say businesses we work with, you always know what to build, right? And so it comes with working with technology partners. So I'd say even with the largest organizations, the ones we've seen the most success with, where they've seen ROI. And they've seen, things like cutting down their costs, increase in revenue, tripling their client base, for example, with things like Citibank. It's when they've looked at how can I simplify the process and use what you have off the shelf and build off of that. That's the process of getting something out there in the market quickly, right? So the classic thing in the Valley, right, in Silicon Valley is always that many people have great ideas, but you can keep building and building and building and building. And that's the difference sometimes between a person who's able to build something amazing and a person who's a great business person, because you need to be able to get something out in the market that's good enough, right? Get started. And that's where I think a lot of businesses can fall. And it's the same thing, by the way, in small and medium-sized businesses. You've got a small budget. You don't have the resources, not always, and the knowledge too, to know what to develop. So look at something that's easy and simple that you can roll out quickly. There are businesses that market themselves as turnkey. And then I hear that, 8-9 months later, that they still haven't rolled out, right? Because the process of rolling out and onboarding is very difficult. So focus on simple, off the shelf turnkey. And then the second thing is focus on a particular process. Regardless of whether it's, me looking at Moxo and what we do, or whatever part of your business you're looking to solve for, whether it's client interactions or it's something else, focus on a particular process, look for a one-stop solution. And tie that one-stop solution to a process. Otherwise, it becomes a nightmare. It becomes complex. And to make the smallest change in organizations, you'll be buying a bunch of new tech and finding that half of it doesn't get used and it's a money drain. So start small, tie to a single process, and focus on finding something that's one stop for the process.
I love that, Nikhita. I think it's a great point that you made as well, because there's a great book called How to Think Like a Rocket Scientist. And I think I've recommended this before to people when they come on. But it talks exactly to your point, and it gives the example of Google X. They said they kept cooking up all these new ideas in the kitchen, and they were like, all these awesome ones and all these new initiatives, and they couldn't sell them because they didn't have a salesperson involved. And they were like, what the hell do we do here? We've got like a massive list of all these innovative projects and products and services and B2B, B2C, you name it. And they're like, no one knows about it because we don't know how to commercialize it. So they got someone in that took it and was just like, right, the process is behind this. aren't great because we're not getting it to market, and no one's ever going to find out about certain things that we probably use for granted now. Like there's all range of ideas, but it's that point, isn't it, Nikhita? How do you get it from an idea to being implemented and actually real ROI, such as what Moxo's got, like 18% increase in net promoter scores or 10%, 10 times quicker onboarding? So important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at every founder story. In fact, you'll always see that there are these arguments that, hey, there's one person who's really marketed, but he didn't do anything. It was the guy who built it. And I always think how naive that is as a statement, because yes, there's somebody who built it and there's somebody who's brilliant, in knowing what to build and how to do it. But there's the person telling them what to build and why they should build it that way. And the person saying, hey, this is what's marketable. This is what's sellable, right? So you need that combination. Actually, many times you can find a lot of amazing builders, but you don't always find a lot of people who have the right idea and know how to sell it, right?
Yeah.
And that takes something. And so finding that combination, you'll typically, I think, always see that in some of the most amazing tech companies. There's a combination of the two.
Yeah. So how does that work then, Nikhita? How or what would you recommend then for small businesses against big businesses? And I said it's like anyone will say pros and cons, but we work with startups, and startups watch the money a lot closer than the big companies at times. I'm not to say the bigger companies don't. I'm sure they do. They have the departments, and we work with publicly traded customers, but they definitely do. But startups are much more, I'd say, much more. Well, if we're not going to use it, we're not having it. We're not in that position where we can use it. And I remember one of them saying, one of the customers we work with that publicly traded in the NLP space, they were selling to a big financial firm, and they were saying they were already in the business, like their services were already used, but they spoke to a different department, and they were like, "Oh, we have no clue we use you. There was no communication about that. Like we didn't know you were processing these documents." What would you recommend, Nikhita, or what have you seen for, say, small businesses who want to automate, and those steps are really clear, but I just want to elaborate on it slightly. What would you recommend that they can do compared to larger businesses? Because there is that kind of idea that we're small, we can't afford it, we can't get it in place, which I think is rubbish. Like there's all sorts of solutions out there that you can pay monthly, or you can do it, you can pay it by usage based. What would you say it would change for them, or would you recommend the same steps, or is there something else you'd be encouraging the small startup that's going into their third, fourth, fifth year of business?
I would actually strongly recommend the same steps, because I think it gets more complicated for larger organizations because of the silos, because of the red tape, because of the timelines. But startups and small businesses have the brilliance, they can move much faster if they want to, right? I can buy something today and implement it for my business tomorrow if I'm a small business, because you, in a way, are the owner, the operator. That's what we see a lot. The owner, the operator is the same person. Actually, what gets harder is when you go to very large businesses, the person who's operating the entire division and owns the problem is somebody different than the person who's, willing to sign off on the budget. And then that's different than somebody, who actually sits there and controls what IT solutions get rolled out. So there's the person who understands the problem statement. There's the person who can say yes. And then there's the person who, assesses the tech, who has nothing to do with the problem statement typically. So actually, I think small businesses have an advantage. They can move faster. They're leaner. So it's important, again, with a small business to say, don't limit yourself by thinking, you need to buy up every big name out there. I think that's where you go down the money drain hole. And we've seen that with some small businesses. And I do think it's changed, by the way, in the last few years. I think people are becoming a lot more open to it, and they've realized there's an array of solutions out there, but it takes some time and digging. I also think it's through word of mouth, right? If you have a great client experience as a client of another business, had that happen a lot, where somebody's a client of somebody else and they use Moxo and they say, wow, this was so easy. I loved my experience. How can I do this for my business? And it was, right? So I think it really, really is the same for small businesses, but it's actually more so for small businesses that you can buy something quick off the shelf, but it's critical you look at what process you're going to tie it to. What specific process are you going to start with, and keep it simple.
I love that. I love it. It comes back to it's such a good point as well, Nikhita, because it's such a making sure the tech side's right, but also making sure that you still got that trusting point in the human that's selling it to the other person. And we always say, I think I learned it from Tony Robbins, is emotion is the ultimate resource, because if you can get them hooked on, if I can talk to a marketing manager and they can go back to their board or their director and say, look how many leads we've got, look how much we've got this, look how our efficiency's up, they're going to love us. And if they love us, of course, they're going to, it may or may not, but it overspill into conversations they have with tech partners or their community or whoever it might be, to think you have made my life so much easier. Similar to Moxo, like you've sped up our onboarding process, thank God, because we don't have to not deal with it, but it's just so much smoother and our satisfaction goes up, right?
And I would honestly say, it can sound cliche, but that's why I love doing what I do, because being in customer success, you hear the pains of clients and you hear the success stories, right? You hear the, I'm coming in because I'm struggling so much. Is this too good to be true? And then when you see them go live and you see in that, you check back in our 2-week check-in or our 1-month check-in, and this client is like, hey, I've already upgraded. I've already bought more users and I've seen direct impact. And oh, by the way, the impact is my whole onboarding process is cut down to a few days from a few weeks. I'm immediately seeing that my team is able to service more clients. We have a great example of Guardian Estate Solutions. So they're an estate planning firm. So when someone passes away, they help people manage the entire estate closure and, all the different things, as you can imagine, that come into play. So it's finance, closure, insurance, wills, long list. And what they told us is, by using Moxo, not only have they been able to significantly increase their client base, and this is just one example, but he said he's been able to offer a whole menu of smaller scale services. Because in the past, because it was so handheld and it was all email based, so much time was wasted in the back and forth. They don't have time to offer just one-off small pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
They can't afford that. But now, because of how easy and streamlined it is, he says, I can have team members working anywhere in the US and I don't care, because I can see what they're doing. I can follow up. I can say, hey, you haven't taken action. I'm not maintaining mental to-do lists. I can push out a workflow and the entire process runs. And I'm sitting there and I can see the client, can now just pick a menu of services and say, I only want these 2 things from you. And the process is done in 1 week. He's seen an increase in his client base and his revenue, and costs have gone down. So that's the biggest, and most fulfilling thing I'd say in my job. Coming back to your first question, how did I get here and why do I love it so much? This is why. Because sitting at Moxo, you see a law firm with this type of success story on the same day that you see a huge bank, right? You see a Citibanks and the Standard Charters of the world, and Raiffeisen, where they have a different app for every country, and hundreds of thousands and millions of users. And then you're going to a small Christmas lights company, or a small accounting firm or business consulting firm that has 10 clients and 3 internal staff members. And see similar ROI, right?
I love that. And I'd encourage everyone to watch. You're watching live or recording. I was looking for it now with the amount that you've got on the customer page. It's very interesting. Is that A, the way it's displayed is very nice. It's very clean. But B, you go from something like Balfour Homes, which I've never heard of. I'm sure they're big, an Australian development company, from reading it, right next to Citibank, right next to Bloom Wealth. And I love that. It's such a broad range. A, because of the amount you get to learn, like you said, but B, to show, I don't know if the word's scalable, but it can help no matter what. Like, it can go into certain different areas. And I think that's really cool.
Thank you. And I would say that comes back to your point of, advice to businesses. I think what it's shown me is when a legal firm, an accounting firm, a consulting firm, a bank, a wedding planning company, a fashion design company, there's a modeling agency, all of these businesses have something in common, that they're all trying to streamline their process, cut down the manual load, and make it easier to manage client interactions and streamline the workflow. The fact that you can unite every single one of these businesses in the same type of problem statement.
That's what I was doing. That's what
the same thing again and again, right? That's what's so amazing. And that's when you realize, actually, you can keep it simple. The same advice does apply to everybody. Tie it to a process. Where are the gaps in your process? Where's the biggest, hand holding that's necessary? And what can you cut out? How can you make it simple?
I love that, Nikhita. I do have a question, because I always hate to look at things. I heard this thing recently where they're like, everyone, it's very hard to be negative. It's very easy to be negative. It's very hard to be positive. So whenever challenges me, I say, I never want to say, what would you say the biggest problem or risk is? I say what the biggest opportunity is. But what have you seen, Nikhita, in your time with Moxo? And if there's one that stands out against a certain industry or business, of like an awesome kind of example of how they've managed to streamline something, or how they've managed to leverage those touch points for a better personalization? Like, you're mentioning a few there, but have you seen one where it really opened your eyes and you thought, wow, we've never seen that before in Moxo? Like, you've used it for a whole new way of automating a process to get you an outcome we could have never guessed. Like, because I think you were saying earlier that question where 90% of it was questions that never get asked before or something. So you must see some cool stuff.
Well, I think an amazing one actually was a distribution and delivery company in the UK.
Nice.
They use us to manage all of their driver networks, and
Okay.
they do deliveries for. They're a logistics company and distribution, so
Mm.
they do thousands of deliveries across the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And I that was a really cool use case for me because you see a lot of small businesses, and then we were very huge in banking.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen a large distribution company like this use the portal to
Yeah.
manage the invoicing and order and then assignment workflow for
Yeah.
drivers going out and completing a delivery, right? In a way, I didn't think of that naturally as a complex service cycle because you have this tendency again to associate the client role as somebody who's 100% external.
Yeah.
In their case, again, it was the drivers do function technically as independent contractors.
Yeah.
So that entire management of these, let's say, call it the distributor network, that was one of the coolest use cases I've seen. And they've been able to significantly up their number of deliveries and cut down their costs and again their timelines for deliveries for the entire service cycle because of this, because they
Yeah.
manage the entire assignment and invoicing process through Moxo. So that
Yeah.
was a really interesting one for me. And now I've started to see it in real estate as well. There's a big real estate company in the US where all of the people in the, let's say, the external or the client role are
Yeah.
actually their agents. So they're
Yeah.
a massive brokerage. And then the agents are working with their end clients who are property managers
Yeah.
and construction firms. So it's just a huge network and you see this grow, right? And I was looking at their usage reports and they're just off the charts. And they're like, oh, we barely scratched the surface because we
Yeah.
just have some agents on there. We have a whole network of agents and contractors and. So I
Yeah.
love that use case. I think it gets into something really interesting. You can take it as a distributor use case, the retailer use case. So we're starting to see ones, in the car industry too,
Yeah.
where we'll work with the head office, which is the finance team.
Yeah.
And technically in the external role there, it's
Yeah.
all of the dealerships.
Yeah.
Every dealership functions as its own entity. And they need to work with head office though, because they get their product, the cars from the head office.
Yeah.
They work with the financing team for all of the loan processing.
Yeah.
So it's the number of use cases and interesting processes that you can tie this to, and they have the same problem statement. How do
Yeah.
I make it simpler, faster, and remove the chaos? So those are some really interesting stories I've seen
Yeah.
with some phenomenal ROI. I think I always come back to Citibank because this is one that they openly shared their ROI with us.
Yeah.
When they had 3x increase and 10x increase in client base. They cut down the amount of meetings that their teams were having, but they've been able to double their team's productivity. They went from 35,000 clients to 70,000 clients to 120,000 clients to 160,000 clients using the platform.
That's
So
cool.
there's so many, amazing stats I can share with you. I
Yeah.
think I'd say number one most phenomenal thing for me to see is that you can see stats like this from a very large enterprise and organization on
Yeah.
the same day that you see it from a very small local, just a few people. And
Yeah.
that's the big message. I think small businesses sometimes think tech means it's really expensive. It's only for very large organizations. And that's where I say that's not true.
Yeah.
Look at stuff that's off the shelf and ready to go, and you'd be surprised at what you can find.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. It's very rewarding as well to see something like that, especially when you're helping, I don't know, a company getting started and they're just like, oh my God, we've closed X amount of new revenue because of the processes you put in place. It made us more streamlined and did all this, and you're watching them grow. So I imagine there's quite a few companies on the roster, Nikhita. So you've been with Moxo close to 10 years by the looks of it. So you must have seen some cool companies like coming through the roots and surviving COVID and doing some really cool things, which is
I mean, the most amazing use cases, we're getting, crypto firms that are using us now for discussing the transaction and managing the whole transaction flow. And where it gets really interesting too for us is as a tech provider, we open our platform a lot. So we'll integrate with third-party systems. So if someone has, an existing, transaction system or an existing booking system, a lot of other third-party platforms that may be very specific to that vertical, we'll plug into our workflow using that, right? So they can simply take these other systems that are involved in the process, and we become that presentation and workflow layer for managing the process. But you can still plug in those other systems that are highly relevant, because it does happen in verticals where there are vertical specific systems that are necessary.
Yeah.
for that workflow. And that's
Yeah.
been a really interesting thing to see grow.
I was going to say, imagine with, or I'd imagine, right, with a lot of customer service where you need tickets open all the time, like the integrations they sometimes need, because it's not for them, it's they need to integrate with the customer, so they need to know what platform they're integrating with, and it can be quite large, I'd imagine.
And not to toot our own horn, but I will tell you, this is not a plug. This is just me genuinely conversing with you. I would say our customer success org has been transformed by our own product.
That's awesome.
You know, we scaled our business and our customer success team dramatically in the last year and a half, and it's due to our product. We manage all our own client base and all of our own, clients through individual workflows. And now
that's the best thing though, Nikhita, because imagine if you came and said, imagine if Slack turned around and said, well, we use Microsoft Teams. At least you're doing what you're doing. Like, you're doing as you say. It's not do as I say, you're doing as we do. Like, it's more confidence for me, I think, with them managing everything off it. Like, it seems to be pretty well.
And that's been a real learning too, right? If I think of a lot of the businesses we work with, technically they're all customer service organizations. They're customer success. Because the moment you're onboarded or that onboarding process starts and a deal is signed or you pay for the services, you're working with customer success. It's just that in tech companies, they call it customer success, and every other business that we work with, they call it the person providing the service, right? So it's brilliant to be able to experience it ourselves, see the ROI ourselves for our business, and to be able to go out there and sell that story to somebody. It's not a pitch. It's just realistically what's helped our business. And that's the most amazing thing, I'd say.
Yeah. And maybe you can create like flows that you can share with people saying, like, look, this is what we do inside Moxo, and developing new ways of doing it. That's actually, I want to be respectful of your time, Nikhita, but maybe one more question, because I was thinking about it on the point before last with all the different businesses, right? Like, we've got a family friend that all his company does is sell boards and roadwork stuff to the roadwork councils, and it's a very, very big business. And you think of all these businesses that you're like, God, like when I was in engineering, like there's companies that design the bottle caps to sell to Unilever, and that's all they do, like the certain bottle caps, and they're massive businesses that are making a lot of money and hiring a lot of people to do things that aren't even the end product. It's just like putting together one small bit of the product for the bigger project. But we've got a lot of innovation happening, right? So you're seeing the metaverse explode, and you're seeing crypto come about and people moving over to crypto wallets or whatever. Other areas that you and the team are seeing at Moxo, like how new ways of working because of things like the metaverse. And the metaverse is going to be huge, apparently, and it's arguably unlimited how big it can go. It's an unlimited blank canvas for what can be done, what can be gone, and all the stats, whether you choose to believe them or not, saying it's 10-1, and not just picking on that. Have you seen any technologies or innovations or solutions like autonomous driving or smart cities being connected through IoT devices? Have you seen anything where it's really moved Moxo, or that you're thinking about on a personal level of, well, how do we solve these businesses? Because they're very new in the way they're thinking, they're very new in the way they're processing, the way that they're transforming the industry.
Absolutely. I think our biggest realization was this idea that all of these industries, this term of workflow has taken on a completely new meaning in the last, I'd even say 5 years. If you look at the rise of the smartphone, that brought about a new business model. The business model of the app didn't exist before the smartphone. So I think that what's so interesting to me is, if you take this term metaverse, yes, based on where we are today, the metaverse is something brand new. But if you look at 20 years ago, technically you could argue that we're already living in somewhat of a metaverse, in the sense that we all have a digital profile. We have social media pages. We have something that represents us in a digital world. So I think this whole metaverse concept is, it's constantly taking a concept that exists today, which is having a digital persona and building upon what that means, right? And so I think it's the same thing if you take that as a parallel to automation in businesses. It's knowing that you will have a digital presence, and you have to have a digital presence to survive in this day and age as a business. So automation is now, okay, well, now that I know I have to have a digital presence, how can I do this in a way that doesn't remove the human touch, but still streamlines and still makes the entire process very convenient, easy to use? Because at this point, think about access to brands and to businesses. It's not, just word of mouth in my local neighborhood, somebody recommended this company. It's, I've got the internet. I can sit anywhere in the world and get access to a company thousands of miles away. and never have to meet them in person. So I think what this whole concept is, right? It's true. So I think the concept of the metaverse, while the newest definition of it, yes, very much so, will take a new meaning for what businesses have to think about and how they need to transform.
Yeah.
It's I think personally already representing a larger problem statement, which is we've been transitioning. I'd say the last 50 years have seen a huge jump in technology.
Yeah.
Particularly the last 10 years, we've created a whole way of living that, I mean, I think to myself nowadays, I go out and you see babies, right? You see they're barely 1 year old and they're like this and they're playing a game. They don't know anything except that world, right? And for some of us, growing up was reading a book and sitting outside and having to think and just make up things around you, right? So I think if you can say that this idea of digitizing and automation is very specific to thinking about a business and their workflows, but I actually think it's just thinking about human psychology. Us as people, we're moving towards a new way of doing things. Every year, we look back on the last 5 years, you'll realize there's something completely new in our behavior and our mannerisms that we think is normal today that 5 years ago was completely weird, right? Or very new. Think, why would you ever do that, right? And so I think that in itself, it's this constant dopamine hit culture we live in. We live in the thing of click something and you get a hit. You buy something, you get a hit. So how can you take that psychology and apply it to the way your business functions? That's where I think we're headed with the metaverse. It's thinking about how can I make it a better experience? But better means something different today than it did 5 years ago than it will 5 years from now. And as a tech company, constantly realizing you're going to have to adapt what new and what automation means. It was transformational 2 years ago is not transformational today, right?
Exactly.
But also not getting lost in the fads and not getting lost in the trends that a year from now are irrelevant.
Yeah, that will no longer be, because it's such an important thing. And I always see it as you're growing as a digital business. I always joke because I asked someone, I was just like, how did you do these kind of things in the 80s when you're trying to run a tech company, when you didn't have all these kind of, and they were like, it annoys me so much, Tom. I don't like to look back on it because if I had the tools I have available today at my fingertips back then, 20 times the size. I was just like, well, you can't change time. But he was like, God, the founders today have it so easy. I'm just like,
I mean, our one of our founders, our CEO, he was the founder of WebEx, right? And he's the earliest investor in Zoom. So for him, I mean, he's like, hey, we always say that he's very much a 20 years in the future thinker. He always has been. And so it's very interesting when he would talk about the video meeting concept, 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it was foreign, right? And people would look at you and say, why would you meet online? That's, of course you have to meet in person.
Why would you Skype?
Of course you have to fly out and sit down in person and get things done. And you realize that while there's all these, small trends that come and go and come and go, 25 years later, what are we doing? We're sitting on a broadcast right now. We're using FaceTime. We're on video meetings day in and day out. So I think that's what's brilliant when you can see that while there's so much tech out there and so much change, sometimes when you look at that bigger problem statement, it's the transformational statement. These transformations last for a long time. And so I think the internet era and the video calling and that type of era has been something that's been a massive change in the market. And it's brought about so much change in other very small and micro changes, larger changes. The next big one is mobile. And that's the one we're in right now. Mobile has changed the business model. It's changed the way we interact. It's changed our expectation of services. It's changed our expectation of social relationships, personal relationships, business relationships. So that's the way we need to look at the metaverse, in my opinion, and how that directly impacts how people want to engage with the business.
I think that's really good. There's a thing that I did actually about a month ago, and it got circled because it was the 15-year anniversary of the iPhone being released. I encourage you to go watch it from Steve Jobs or anyone, because I don't know, you only need to watch a few minutes of it, but there's a moment, Nikhita, where they show, and obviously he's talking around 3 different products, and he's like, obviously I'm talking about one product. and they all lose their shit when he's just like, oh, I can go on the internet, and they're just like, oh my god, like, let's get out there. Like, what, the world's unveiled to us. And now you look at it just like you get annoyed if it doesn't load on your phone within 1 second.
Yeah, you're like, oh, that's irritating. It didn't load my app. Didn't connect me with a driver on my Get app in a moment, right? It's true. Our expectations are constantly raising, but it's also new.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a brilliant point to leave it as well, Nikhita, because I really appreciate you coming on. And there's a lot that we learned about today. And anyone watching, I encourage you to go check out what they're doing at Moxo. And you got some great success stories and some great marketing around it as well, which I always love to see, being a marketer. But really appreciate you joining, Nikhita. And hopefully the next one we can do in person, because we're trying to move a few of them to in person. And would love to see what kind of trends and what we can talk around in the next one, Nikhita.
Would love to. And thank you so much, Tom, for having me today. Really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to the next time.
A lot of fun. Thank you, everyone.